A period of intense unrest ensued during the 1st century BC due to three main causes. First, the wealth from abroad served only to make the rich richer. It did nothing to elevate the plight of the poor. Secondly, it became necessary to hire an army from among the Romans' former enemies because voluntary enlistment didn't provide enough men for their expanding military operations. The third reason for the unrest was the creation of huge country estates and the importation of cheaper and better produce from abroad, both leading to the ruin of small farmers. Generals, rather than aristocrats, became more and more powerful public figures because they had to cope with the increasing turmoil. And Julius Caesar, the most famous Roman general of all, was an example of this change. When Sulla marched on Rome in 88 BC, the preceding decades of restlessness culminated in all-out civil war. 40 years later, Caesar turned the republic into a dictatorship. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, one of the three men who came to power as a triumvirate was Octavian. 17 years later, Octavian was officially handed sole executive powers and was renamed Imperator Augustus. In honor of Augustus' most important achievement, the creation of peace, the Augustan Ara Pacis altar was erected. Here is the first instance of imperial art. And the Ara Pacis is a perfect reflection of the times people had confidence in and were proud of their emperor. As conservatives, the Romans looked back over their shoulders to the golden age of Greece for artistic ideals. Yet their art also reflected the vivid realism which was the cultural legacy of their Hellenistic and Etruscan ancestors. We can see it in the architecture under Augustus, which looks back to classical Greece. For example, the Maison Carrée at Nîmes looks very much like a small Greek temple. Yet, when you look closely at the Parthenon, many subtle differences are discernible. The front and back are symmetrical, for example, with a freestanding colonnade running majestically around all four sides. On three sides of the Maison Carrée, however, the colonnade is reduced to pilasters, columns attached to the wall. This makes the facade of the Roman temple a dramatic and theatrical focal point. Further, the Roman temple is usually part of the urban scene, so it is raised on a high podium to give it emphasis. The Greek temple, on the other hand, doesn't need the architectural emphasis, for it often sits atop raised and sacred ground. The temple is thus an altar in itself, remote and symbolic in function. Not so the Roman temple. In fact, the front porch often served a practical purpose as a political stage for the emperor. This use of the temple is just one example of how the Romans aggrandized the individual. But some details show that the personality cult of the emperor was gradually developed. For example, stuck off to the left, where the frieze has unfortunately been damaged. He is given no more importance than anyone else in the procession. But 70 years later, in the Arch of Titus, erected to commemorate Titus' conquest of Jerusalem, the emperor is now clearly the hero and intended to be worshipped as such. Although the horses appear in profile, the chariot of Titus is twisted to a three-quarter view in order to show the emperor in full face. By the era of Trajan, at the beginning of the 2nd century, the empire was at the height of its success. Indeed, the age of Trajan was often been likened to the golden age of Pericles in Greece. With its magnificent highway system, the imperial government was able to keep close tabs on her colonies. Again, a symbol of an age devoted to organization. No longer were the landed gentry and the rest of the senatorial class industried with important affairs of state. Rather, they were sent to govern the colonies, while a highly skilled and trusted corps of professional politicians surrounded the emperor. As the self-importance of the emperor continued to expand, so did its artistic expression. The emperor's self-esteem is on elaborate display on a relief-covered column which commemorates Trajan victories over the Dacians. So, as we could see, the historical narrative form proved to be perfectly suited to the typically Roman characteristic of describing their leaders' exploits in painstaking detail.